Brazilian football fans had waited 64 years to repair the scarves from 1950. It was supposed to be a new milestone, but it turned into a funeral. What happened over the next 90 minutes wasn't a football match. It was a national myth, exposed on live television, stripped bare in front of the entire planet. This is the story of Brazil versus Germany. The night the Seleção died and 200 million people watched the funeral. To understand what happened in Belo Horizonte, you have to understand what football means in Brazil. And I don't mean means a lot, the way it means a lot in England or Argentina. I mean it differently. I mean it is woven into the national identity, the way the American flag is woven into the American one. Football isn't something Brazil does. Football is something Brazil is. 5 World Cups, more than any other nation. Pelé, Garrincha, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho. The yellow shirt isn't just a jersey, it's a covenant. A promise that when it matters, when the world is watching, Brazil will play beautiful football and they will win. And they had not lost a competitive match on home soil since 1975. Nearly 4 decades. An entire generation of Brazilians had been born, grown up, started families, and never once seen their team lose at home in a match that counted. Think about that. It wasn't a record. It was a law of physics. The sun rises, the tide comes in. Brazil doesn't lose at home. So when FIFA awarded Brazil the 2014 World Cup, the first time the tournament had been held there since 1950, the narrative wrote itself. This was destiny. This was the coronation. The greatest footballing nation on their own sacred ground, lifting the trophy in the Maracana. There was just one small problem. The country was on fire. The 2014 World Cup cost Brazil an estimated $11 billion. New stadiums, infrastructure, the kind of spending that looks impressive on paper and obscene in person when your hospitals don't have beds and your schools don't have teachers. A year before the tournament, millions of Brazilians took to the streets. The protests started over a bus fare increase and escalated into something much larger. "We want FIFA standard hospitals," read one banner. "There will be no cup," read another. Police responded with tear gas and rubber bullets. The images went around the world. By the time the World Cup kicked off in June 2014, the mood inside Brazil was fractured. Half the country was desperate for the team to win, to prove that the sacrifice had been worth it, that the beautiful game could still heal everything. The other half wanted the whole thing to burn. Not the team, exactly. The system, the corruption, the lie that football could paper over a broken country. Into this pressure cooker walked a 22-year-old kid from Sao Paulo with bleached hair and a number 10 on his back. And every single person in that divided nation agreed on exactly one thing. He was the answer. Neymar was 22 years old and already carried the kind of burden that would crush most professionals twice his age. He was the future of Brazilian football, the heir to Pelé and Ronaldo, the boy who was supposed to bring the 6th star home. Barcelona's golden child, playing in a World Cup on his own doorstep, in front of people who had mortgaged their national pride on his left foot. And for the group stages and the round of 16, he delivered. 4 goals. Electric performances. The kind of football that made you believe the script was still intact. Brazil weren't playing well, not really. The defense looked shaky, the midfield was porous. Luis Felipe Scolari's tactics were, to put it charitably, optimistic. But none of that mattered because Neymar was there, and Neymar was magic, and magic was enough. Until it wasn't. Quarter-final against Colombia, the 87th minute. Juan Camilo Zuniga's knee connected with Neymar's spine. The sound, according to players nearby, was sickening. Neymar went down and didn't get up. He was stretchered off the pitch in visible agony, tears streaming down his face. The diagnosis came hours later. Fractured vertebra. Tournament over. The image of Neymar lying face down on that stretcher, sobbing, is burned into Brazilian football history. Because in that moment, everyone watching understood the same thing. It wasn't just a player going down, it was the plot. The narrative that was supposed to carry 200 million people to glory had just snapped like a spine on a Colombian knee. Brazil still had a semi-final to play. They just didn't have a reason to believe anymore, and they were about to lose another one. Captain Thiago Silva was suspended for the semi-final. Yellow card accumulation. It sounds mundane, bureaucratic even, but the timing was surgical. Brazil's defensive leader, the one player who could organize the backline and project some semblance of calm, was sitting in the stands in a suit while his teammates prepared to face the most efficient football machine on the planet. No Neymar, no Thiago Silva. The two pillars, gone. What remained was a squad that had been held together by duct tape and collective prayer, now stripped of both. The pre-match footage from the tunnel tells you everything. The Brazilian players were crying before the game even started, holding up Neymar's shirt, eyes red, lips trembling. David Luiz, who was now captaining the side by default, looked like a man walking to his own sentencing. Germany, by contrast, looked like they were going to the office, calm, organized, professional. Toni Kroos later said they could sense Brazil's fragility before kickoff. Philipp Lahm described the atmosphere as emotional but vulnerable. Bastian Schweinsteiger said the German dressing room was quiet. Not nervous quiet, certain quiet. The Mineirão in Belo Horizonte held 58,000 people that night. Every single one of them believed in miracles. The universe, it turned out, had a different word in mind. And that word was arithmetic. 11th minute. Thomas Müller, a corner kick that Brazil's defense watched arrive like passengers on a platform, watching the wrong train. Müller peeled off his marker, found space that shouldn't have existed at this level, and headed it home. 1-0 Germany. The stadium exhaled. Not panic. Not yet. They had Neymar's spirit. They had the crowd. They had the weight of history. They had absolutely nothing. 23rd minute. Miroslav Klose. A scramble in the box. A half clearance that cleared nothing. And Klose prodded it in. 2-0. Klose had just become the all-time World Cup top scorer. A historic achievement. Nobody in the stadium cared. The crowd had gone from singing to murmuring. 12 minutes between the first goal and the second. A recoverable deficit, in theory. In practice, the Brazilian defense had the structural integrity of wet cardboard. 24th minute. 1 minute later, Toni Kroos, who had been playing like a man doing crossword puzzles at a funeral, calmly slotted in the third, 3-0. 60 seconds between the second and third goals. The stadium didn't react. There was no collective gasp, no roar of disbelief. There was silence. The silence of 58,000 people simultaneously processing the same impossible thought. This is actually happening. 26th minute. 2 minutes later. Kroos again. 4-0. 24 minutes played. 4 goals conceded. The German players had stopped celebrating by this point, not out of respect. Out of bewilderment, Sami Khedira later said they couldn't believe what was happening either. It was surreal, he recalled. We kept scoring and nobody was trying to stop us. 29th minute. Khedira himself, a passing move of such casual precision that it looked rehearsed. 5 German passes, 0 Brazilian touches, 5-0. 29 minutes, 5 goals. Let me put that in perspective. Brazil had not lost a competitive home match in 39 years. They had just conceded 5 goals in 18 minutes in a World Cup semi-final, on home soil. In front of their own people, the television cameras, to their eternal credit or eternal cruelty, understood what was actually happening before anyone else did. They stopped showing the football, they started showing the faces. And the faces told a story that no scoreline ever could. A man in his 60s, wearing a faded yellow shirt, sitting completely still, tears running down his face without him even seeming to notice. A child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, looking up at his father for an explanation that wasn't coming. The Mineirão had become something no stadium should ever have to be, a theatre of grief. 58,000 people, experiencing a collective psychological event. Not anger, not frustration. Something closer to bereavement. The death of something they'd believed in their entire lives. Halftime, Brazil 0, Germany 5. Luis Felipe Scolari walked into the dressing room and had nothing to say. What could he say? Let's get it back to 5-3 and see what happens. The game was over. It had been over since the 24th minute. Possibly since the 87th minute of the Colombia match. Possibly since a knee met a spine. And a nation's fairy tale ended on a stretcher. Germany scored twice more in the second half. André Schürrle in the 69th and 79th minutes, 7-0. The goals barely registered. The German substitutes on the bench had stopped watching. Some of them were on their phones. Joachim Löw, Germany's manager, later admitted he told his players to stop embarrassing Brazil. They scored 2 more anyway. And then, in the 90th minute, Oscar scored for Brazil. A consolation goal. The word consolation, doing the heaviest lifting it has ever done in the English language. 7-1. The Brazilian players didn't celebrate. Oscar stood with the ball in his hands, staring at nothing. Some of his teammates were crying. David Luiz, who had spent the second half looking like a man slowly realizing he's in the wrong building, put his face in his shirt and wept. The final whistle blew. Brazil 1, Germany 7. The most humiliating result in Brazilian football history. The most humiliating result in World Cup history. A scoreline that would have been dismissed as unrealistic in a video game. The Brazilian fans who stayed, and many of them did something extraordinary. They applauded the German team, not sarcastically, sincerely. As if to say, you did what we could not. You were what we pretended to be. It was the most dignified response to the most undignified evening in the history of the sport. Germany went on to win the World Cup, beating Argentina in the final. Brazil lost the third-place match to the Netherlands 3-0. They finished 4th on home soil, having conceded 10 goals in their final 2 games. The tournament they had spent $11 billion to host, the tournament that was supposed to be their redemption, ended with the most public humiliation in the history of international football. But here's the thing that nobody wanted to say out loud, even though everyone was thinking it. The 7-1 didn't create the problem. It revealed it. Brazil had been getting away with it for years. Over-reliance on individual brilliance, tactical stubbornness, a footballing philosophy built on mythology rather than methodology. The emperor had no clothes. Germany just proved it in front of 200 million witnesses. The protests before the tournament had asked a question: is football enough to fix a broken country? The scoreline answered it: no, football is not enough. It was never enough. The beautiful game cannot feed your children, fund your hospitals, or hold your politicians accountable. And when you ask it to do all of those things, when you pile the weight of an entire nation's identity onto a sport, eventually something breaks. On the 8th of July, 2014, in the Mineirão Stadium in Belo Horizonte, something broke. Not a team, not a record, a belief. And 200 million people heard it crack. If you want to follow the story of why Brazil stopped being scary, the death of Joga Bonito, check out our video here.